Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're not just looking at a security bug. We are going deep, really deep, into a flaw so severe it scored a perfect 10.0 on the CVS scale.
Which is, the ultimate warning sign.
Absolutely, and it's got a name that fits the severity. Ni8mare.
And when you hear 10.0, you need to understand this isn't just hype. A perfect score means a few very specific, very bad things. It's easy to exploit, it needs zero credentials, and the impact is, well, it's total. Complete compromise.
You're talking about a digital master key?
It's exactly that. It's like an intruder walking into your main vault, not because they picked the lock, but because the master key was just lying there on the welcome mat.
And the vault in this case is one of the most sensitive pieces of infrastructure an organization can have today, Ni8n.
Right.
If you're out there building any kind of modern workflow or connecting different services, you almost certainly know Ni8n. It's this incredibly popular open source automation platform.
It really is the central nervous system for so many companies. It connects your databases, your cloud services, your APIs, all your SaaS tools. It's the glue.
And that's the core of the problem, isn't it?
Yeah.
The problem isn't just the n8n server itself, but what it holds.
Precisely. To be efficient, these platforms have to centralize all the secrets. They hold the API keys, the OAuth tokens, the database connection strings, basically everything an attacker would need to just pivot across your entire infrastructure.
The researchers who found this, Sire Research Labs, they called a compromised n8n instance a gold mine for threat actors.
And they were not exaggerating.
So our mission today is to get past that scary headline. We need to really dissect the mechanics of this thing, which is officially CVE-2026-21858. We're going to break down how attackers could bypass authentication using something called content type confusion, and how that seemingly small failure spirals into full remote code execution.
And we should definitely give credit where it's due. Security researcher Dora Atias discovered this and reported it responsibly way back in November of 2025. But the scariest part of his finding remains the same. An unauthenticated attacker, anyone on the internet, can get complete control.
That phrase right there, unauthenticated, that's the key detail that separates this from almost everything else we talk about.
It changes the entire threat model.
Okay, so let's unpack this. And to really get the full picture, we need to look at the very troubling context in which Ni8mare was discovered.
Yeah, you really can't look at this one in a vacuum. To understand why Ni8mare was so catastrophic, you have to realize it was the grand finale of a really bad couple of weeks for a neighborhood.
Couple of weeks?
Over a span of just 2 weeks, they had to disclose and patch 4 separate critical severity vulnerabilities. Ni8mare was just the 4th one.
Wow. 4 criticals in 2 weeks. That doesn't sound like a few isolated mistakes. That sounds like something more systemic might be going on, maybe with how they handle user input or privileges.
It certainly raises questions.
So if there were 3 other critical flaws, one of which also had a 10.0 score, why are we focusing so hard on this one, on Ni8mare?
It all comes down to the barrier to entry. Every single one of those other threats, as bad as they were, required the attacker to already have a foot in the door. They were what we call authenticated threats.
Meaning you needed a password?
You needed a password, an API key, some kind of legitimate access. Ni8mare requires nothing but an internet connection.
Yeah.
But looking at those other 3 really sets the stage for why this one was so different.
All right, let's do that. What was the first one on that wave?
The first was CVE-2026-21858. This one scored a 9.9, so, incredibly severe. The issue was an improper control of dynamically managed code.
Okay, in plain English.
It means that if you were already logged in as a valid user, you could craft a special payload. And under certain conditions, you could trick the system into executing code on the server. Remote code execution.
RCE. The ultimate goal for an attacker.
Yeah, exactly. But you had to get that initial login first. You had to steal credentials or be an insider. It was a huge risk, but there was a barrier. They patched that one pretty quickly in a few releases.
So it required effort. A phishing campaign, maybe. Something to get that first credential.
Right. There was friction. Then came the second one, which they codenamed N8scape. That's CVE 2026-21858. Also a 9.9.
N8scape. Sounds like an escape.
That's exactly what it was. A sandbox bypass. The n8n lets you run like little bits of custom code in your workflows. To keep things safe, It runs that code inside a sandbox.
A digital cage, basically, to stop bad code from touching the actual server.
Perfect analogy. An N8scape let an attacker break out of that cage. Again, you had to be an authenticated user with permission to create workflows. But if you were, you could run commands directly on the host machine.
And once you're out of the sandbox on a production server,
Yeah.
what can you actually do?
Oh, it's devastating. You can start reading server files, environment variables that might have other secrets in them. You could look at what other processes are running, maybe attack other services on the same machine. It's a huge escalation. But again, you had to be logged in to begin with.
I'm sensing a pattern here.
A very important one. The third flaw, CVE-2026-21857, this one actually did get a perfect 10.0 score, just like Ni8mare.
So why isn't it the one we're focused on?
Because, again, it was for an authenticated attacker. It was a classic file upload vulnerability. If you were logged in, you could upload a dangerous file like a web shell script and then trick the server into running it. That gives you full compromise, a 10.0 outcome, but you still had to get past that login screen first.
So 3 catastrophic flaws, but all of them required jumping that first hurdle of authentication, which, is a hurdle that security teams monitor. They can rate limit logins, look for suspicious activity.
It creates friction. It takes work.
And this is where the entire security model just shatters. This is where Ni8mare CVE 2026-21858 is in a league of its own.
It is. If those other 3 were high-risk, high-friction attacks, Ni8mare is a low-friction, maximum-impact drive-by. It just completely ignores the security perimeter.
No credentials needed.
None. You don't need a stolen password. You don't need to be a trusted user.
Yeah.
The flaw is a sort of architectural mistake in how it handles requests, this content-type confusion, and it gives you that initial foothold. The ability to read any file on the system instantly.
Yeah.
From anywhere on the internet.
And that unauthenticated access is what makes it a true 10.0. It means anyone can just scan the internet for public n8n instances and start pulling down config files, databases, secrets.
It turns it from a targeted attack into a mass scanning event. The difference between needing to pick a specific lock versus finding the front door of the entire building wide open.
And for a tool like n8n, which is often set up to receive webhooks from the public internet, that public exposure is often a feature, not a bug.
It's a business requirement.
So we need to be really clear here. Which versions were vulnerable?
The scope was, well, it's massive.
Right.
It affected all versions of n8n prior to and including 1.65.0. The fix was rushed out in version 1.121.0 on November 18th, 2025.
So if you're listening to this right now, you need to check your version. Anything below 1.121.0 and you are wide open.
Absolutely. And while that's the first safe version, you should really be upgrading to the latest, like 1.123.0 or one of the 2.x versions. The key takeaway here is that Ni8mare is the ultimate danger because it just removes that first line of defense we all rely on, the login screen.
Okay. Now that we set the stage and we understand just how bad this is, let's get into the technical guts. How does this content type confusion actually work?
Right. This is where it gets really interesting.
Okay, so the root of the problem is deep inside the part of n8n that handles webhooks and files. As we said, webhooks are, fundamental. They let n8n listen for events from the outside world.
And when any request comes in from the internet to one of those webhook endpoints, the server has to figure out what to do with it. The first piece of code that looks at it is a function, generally called something like parse request body.
Think of it like a mail sorter in a post office. Its only job is to look at the envelope, the headers of the request, and decide which department gets the actual package, the content.
And its main clue is the content type header. That header tells the server what's inside. Application JSON means it's structured data. Text plain means it's just text. And multi-part form data. That's the special one. That means a file is being uploaded.
So parse request body looks at that header and sends the request down one of 2 very different paths.
Exactly 2 paths. Path A is the specialized one. If the content type is multi-part form data, the system says, aha, a file upload. It then calls a function called parse form data. This is the secure designated file parser.
And what's that parser built with?
It's a Node.js app. So it uses a really common battle-tested library for this called Formidable. Formidable knows how to handle binary data safely. And once it's done, it stores the information about the uploaded file, its name, where it's temporarily stored, in a very specific place. rec.body.files.
Okay, so path A, the header says file upload. It goes to the special file parser, and the output lands in rec.body.files. Clean and secure.
That's the plan. Path B is for everything else. If the content type is anything else, like JSON, it calls a different function, parse body, the regular parser. And that parser puts the data into a completely separate variable, rec.body.
So the whole architecture is built on this core assumption. Rec.body is for regular data, rec.body.files is for file data, and they are mutually exclusive. The content type header is the gatekeeper that decides which one gets filled.
It's the gatekeeper, and if the file parser doesn't run, rec.body.files should be empty. It should be null.
And I'm guessing this is where the slip-up happens.
This is the critical failure that Sierra found. The vulnerability happened because a later function, a file handling function, was called without first checking that content type header.
Wait, how does that happen? How does a request get to a file handling function if it wasn't a file?
The vulnerable code was in a function called form webhook. This is used when you have a public form that triggers automation. And this function, incorrectly, would call another function copy binary file. The problem is, copy binary file is designed to only work with the data inside rec.body.files.
So form webhook just assumed that if it was running, the right kind of parsing must have already happened. It called the file copying function no matter what.
Exactly. So an attacker sends a normal JSON request. That goes down path B, the regular parser runs, and the rec.body variable gets filled with their JSON data. Rec.body.files is, as you'd expect, empty. But then the flawed code calls copy binary file anyway.
And that's the moment of confusion, right? The attacker can now mess with what the file handler thinks is in rec.body.files?
Precisely. Because the attacker is setting JSON, they control the structure of the rec.body object. They can craft their JSON payload to include a key named files that mimics the structure that the real file parser would have created.
Let's pause on that because that's the core of the exploit. They're sending JSON, not a file, but they're making the JSON look like file metadata.
That's it. The formidable library would create an object with keys like file path and original file name. So the attacker just sends a JSON payload that looks something like this: files, etc.
I see. The regular JSON parser sees that, populates rec.body, and because the attacker included a key named files, that data gets mapped into the exact memory location that the copy binary file function is out to look at.
You've got it. The content type check was the only thing stopping an attacker from just writing whatever they wanted into the object that the file handler trusted. By skipping that check, the attacker gets total control over rec.body.files, even though no file was ever uploaded.
And as Dorotheus, the researcher, pointed out, if you control that object, you control the most important piece of information for any file operation, the file's location.
Yes, his quote was perfect. He said, "Since this function is called without verifying the content type, we control the entire recu.body.files object. That means we control the file path parameter."
So instead of copying an uploaded file, we can copy any local file from the system. That is chilling.
It's profound. The function thinks it's doing its job, copying a user's uploaded file. But instead, the attacker has told it to copy a critical system file, like a database or a configuration file.
And the system just obediently reads the contents of that local file and pushes it out through the rest of the workflow.
And that gives the attacker the arbitrary file read primitive, the AFR.
And if that workflow is designed to, say, display the file's content in a chat app, the attacker can make it display the contents of a password file instead, all without ever logging in.
That AFR is the initial foothold. On a normal web server, that's bad. But on an automation hub that's designed to hold secrets, it's the key to the kingdom.
Which leads us directly to the escalation. How do you turn reading one file into taking over the entire system?
That escalation is a work of art in a terrifying way.
So we've got the arbitrary file read primitive, that's the foothold. The Sierra researchers lead out this really clear 5-step path from there to total compromise.
And this path is a masterclass in exploiting architectural assumptions. It starts with the scenario they laid out. Imagine a public website form powered by n8n that takes an input and then displays it somehow, maybe in a chat interface.
So the attacker can see the output of the file they force the system to read.
Correct. So the attacker uses the Ni8mare flaw, first target.
Step 1, database extraction.
The heart of the n8n instance. In a default setup, n8n uses a simple SQLite database. It's just a single file, and it's located at a very predictable path. homonode.n8ndatabase.sqlite.
And because it's a single file, not a complex database server.
It's incredibly easy to steal. The attacker uses the AFR primitive and just tells the system, read the file at database.sqlite. The server happily obliges, reads the entire binary contents of the database, and pushes it out through the workflow. The attacker now has a complete copy of all user data, all workflow definitions, everything.
And the second that file is out, the game has fundamentally changed.
It leads right into the next step.
Step 2, credential harvest.
The attacker now has the database file on their own machine. They can open it up and just browse the tables. They're looking for the users table.
And in there they'll find
Everything. The administrator's user ID, their email, and most importantly, the hashed password for the admin account.
But it's hashed, right? They can't just use it. They'd have to crack it.
They could, but cracking is slow. It's noisy. A sophisticated attacker doesn't want to brute force the door. They want to forge a key. And to forge the key, they need one more ingredient.
Which they get with the same trick.
The exact same trick.
Step 3, configuration exposure.
The attacker goes back to the well. They use the AFR primitive again. This time, they target another predictable file, the main config file, usually at homonode.n8n config.
And what's the prize inside that file?
The crown jewel. The encryption secret key. This is a long random string of text that the n8n instance uses as its root of trust. It's the secret key it uses to sign and verify session cookies.
Ah, so it's not about the password at all. It's about the thing that proves a session is legitimate.
Exactly. If you have that key, you can create a signature that the server will trust completely. It's like stealing the official stamp and wax seal from the king.
Okay, so now they have the admin's user details from the database, and they have the server's private signing key from the config file.
They have everything they need.
Step 4, authentication bypass.
Right. The attacker now constructs a fake session cookie. It's like building a fake passport. They put the admin's user ID and email in it, and then they sign it using the secret key they just stole.
And when they present that forged passport to the n8n server?
The server checks the signature. It uses its own secret key to do the check. And because the attacker used that exact same key, the signature matches perfectly. The server says, "Welcome, Mr. Administrator," and lets them right in.
They've completely bypassed the login screen. They haven't used a password. They've just walked in with a key the server itself taught them how to make.
And just like that, they've gone from an anonymous attacker on the internet to the most powerful, privileged user on the system.
And once you're the admin of an automation platform, the path to the final step is wide open.
It's the inevitable conclusion.
Step 5, remote code execution.
This is the checkmate. As an administrator, the attacker can now use n8n's own powerful built-in features against it. Specifically, there's a tool in n8n called the execute command node.
Which is designed for legitimate purposes, right? To let workflows run scripts or interact with the server.
Of course, it's a core feature. But in the hands of an attacker, it's the ultimate weapon. They just create a new workflow, drag in an execute command node, and tell it to run any command they want on the underlying server.
Like downloading a backdoor.
Or establishing a reverse shell, stealing even more secrets. They save the workflow, activate it, and it's game over. They've achieved RCE and have full persistent control over the entire instance.
That is just a stunningly simple and effective escalation chain. From one tiny logic flaw, not checking a header, to total system compromise. It's not just a technical flaw. It's a failure of architectural trust.
It really is. It shows the danger of centralization. n8n is powerful because it connects everything. But when it breaks, that centralization becomes a single point of catastrophic failure.
Which brings us to the blast radius. Why is owning the n8n server so much worse than, say, owning a simple website?
Because the n8n server has the keys to everything else. When you get RCE on that box, you don't just own that one server, you inherit the keys to every single service it connects to.
The gold mine.
It's the ultimate gold mine. You now have the live operational API keys for their entire cloud environment, AWS, Google Cloud, Azure. You have the OAuth tokens for their Salesforce, their GitHub, their Slack. You have the live connection strings for their production databases.
A compromise of n8n is a compromise of everything it touches.
Everything. The attacker can use n8n's own legitimate, trusted connections to pivot into every corner of the organization's infrastructure. It's an enterprise-wide breach originating from a single, unauthenticated request.
That's a profound lesson. Any system that acts as a central hub of trust has to be held to the absolute highest standard, especially when it comes to handling input from the public internet.
Every choice matters. Even using a default file path for your database becomes a security risk if the front door can be kicked open that easily.
Okay, this has been an incredibly detailed look at the problem. We have to pivot now to the solution. For everyone listening, what are the practical, urgent steps you need to take?
The immediate fix is, thankfully, very straightforward. It's not complicated, but it is urgent. You must upgrade to the patched version, which is 1.121.0 or later, as soon as possible.
That's the non-negotiable step. Patching kills the vulnerability dead.
It removes the flawed code entirely. If you are on any version before 1.1 to 1.10 and you use forms in your workflows, you have to assume you are vulnerable to unauthenticated RCE.
But we know that in large organizations, patching isn't always instant. There can be change freezes, testing cycles. What are the temporary mitigations people can use to protect themselves while they plan the upgrade?
The temporary fixes are all about increasing friction for the attacker. They're about making that public endpoint harder to reach or less useful.
The first one sounds like just basic security hygiene.
It is, but it's critical here. Avoid exposing your n8n instance directly to the internet. If you don't absolutely need it to receive public webhooks, put it behind a firewall, a VPN, something that requires pre-authentication. If the attacker can't reach the front door, they can't exploit the flaw.
Makes sense. The second workaround directly tackles the authentication issue.
Right. You can enforce authentication for all your forms. The whole exploit depends on the form webhook function being unauthenticated. If you configure your forms to require a user to log in before they can submit anything, you completely change the game.
It's not a zero-credential exploit anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It suddenly becomes an authenticated threat, like those other three we talked about. The attacker would have to steal a password first, which buys your security team crucial time to detect them and for you to patch.
And the final temporary defense.
Restrict or disable public webhook and form endpoints. Do an audit. Look at all your active workflows. If you have a public endpoint that isn't mission critical for your business right now, just turn it off, reduce your attack surface. Every open door is a risk until you're patched.
These are great life support measures, but let's zoom out. What's the bigger lesson here from a security design perspective?
The big lesson from Ni8mare is the danger of relying on implicit content handling instead of explicit verification.
Okay, break that down for us. Implicit versus explicit.
Implicit handling is when the code makes an assumption. The code said, well, on the form webhook function, so the code that ran before me must have checked the content type header, which means the data in rec.body.files must be a real, safe file object. It's relying on trust.
Implicit trust. And the attacker's request violated that trust.
Completely. Explicit verification is the opposite. It's paranoid. Explicit code would say, I don't care what's supposed to have happened before me. Before I dare call a function that can touch the file system, like copy binary file, right here, right now, I'm going to check the content type header myself. If it's not exactly multi-part form data, I stop everything.
It's a classic case of failing to validate input at the point of use. You can't just assume the layer before you did its job perfectly.
Never trust input, ever, especially when you're about to do something dangerous with it, like reading a file from a path that the input itself provided. You have to validate and sanitize at every single step.
This also feels like a huge argument for zero trust principles, even for internal system processes.
It's a perfect example. The escalation worked so well because once the attacker read the database file, the system implicitly trusted its own contents. It didn't treat its own config file as a sensitive asset that required another layer of protection. Zero Trust says you don't even trust your own internal processes without verification.
So for everyone listening, why did we spend all this time on this one flaw?
Because Ni8mare isn't just a bug. It's a perfect case study in modern centralized risk. It shows you exactly how a tiny logical mistake in code can be chained together in a series of predictable steps to achieve a total maximum severity compromise. We've basically given you the attacker's playbook for these kinds of platforms.
And the lesson is universal. It doesn't matter if you use n8n or Zapier or some other tool. Any system that centralizes your secrets is, by definition, your single biggest point of risk. If you understand how a simple parser flaw led to this, you can start asking the right questions about the security of any other integrated tool you use.
You have to ask, what happens if the perimeter is breached? How strong are the internal defenses?
A crucial takeaway. So, to recap our journey through Ni8mare, CVE-2026-21858, we saw how this unauthenticated flaw exploited a content-type confusion in the webhook parser, a failure of explicit verification.
That failure gave the attacker an arbitrary file read primitive. And they used that primitive in a brilliant 5-step escalation. Steal the database, harvest the credentials, steal the encryption key from the config file, forge a new admin session.
And finally, achieve remote code execution using the platform's own execute command node. The result: catastrophic. The automation goldmine becomes a single point of total failure, handing over the keys to an organization's entire cloud and SaaS infrastructure.
The message is clear. Patch to 1.121.0 or later now. And if you can't, lock down every single public endpoint you have.
And now, as always, we want to leave you with a final, provocative thought, something for you to take back and apply to your own security posture.
The core issue here was a webhook, a tool designed to efficiently receive data from the untrusted internet, bypassing the normal login screen for the sake of automation.
And if your automation platform is the central nervous system connecting all of your most sensitive accounts, we have to ask you this.
Given the devastating consequences we've just seen from a simple parser confusion, how often are you auditing the integrity of your core message handling mechanisms, the very systems that decide what kind of data is coming in?
Are you sure they're using explicit paranoid verification instead of relying on implicit trust? Because the difference between what the data should be and rigorously checking what the data is might just be the only thing standing between seamless automation and a complete enterprise-wide compromise.
It's a fitting question. If the intake valve is flawed, the pressure will always find a way to break the system.
That's all the time we have for this deep dive. We hope this has been insightful. We'll see you next time.